The year was 1882. The sky over the Wyoming Territory had been a bruised, swollen purple for 3 days. And now, as the stagecoach reached the edge of Galloway, it finally tore open. Clara Whitmore felt the lurch as the heavy wheels sucked into the mud. The coach stopped. Through the rain-lashed window, she saw nothing. Not a town, just a few desperate buildings clinging to the earth, seemingly moments from being washed away. The driver, a man soaked in rain and whiskey, yanked the door open. "Galloway, ma'am, end of the line." Clara gathered her small valise, the only luggage she had dared to bring. Her other trunk, filled with the remnants of her Boston life, was still at the depot in Cheyenne. She would never go back for it. She stepped down. The mud was not mud. It was a cold, greedy soup that instantly swallowed her boot to the ankle. The rain was not rain. It was an icy assault, hitting her with the force of thrown gravel. Her wool traveling suit, the best she owned, was soaked through in seconds. The driver tossed her bag onto the wooden planks of the platform, which was little more than a few boards laid over the muck. "Good luck to you," he grunted, already climbing back to his seat. Eager for the saloon's light she could see down the street, the coach squelched away, leaving her utterly alone. The wind tore the pins from her hair. Auburn strands whipped across her face, stinging her eyes. She had fled the scandal. She had fled the whispers, the cold judgment in the eyes of the congregation, and the suffocating righteous possession of Reverend Barrow. She had run west, seeking a place so vast and empty that her past could not find her. Now, standing in the deluge, with darkness falling and the wind screaming like a mourning woman, she realized she had not found sanctuary. She had found the very edge of the world. The saloon's yellow light was a beacon, but one she could not approach. A lone woman, arriving at night, soaked to the bone? She knew what they would assume. The general store was dark. The land office was shuttered. Then she saw it, set back from the main rut of a street, near a small, dilapidated corral, the old relay station, a low-slung stable, and, attached to it, a small wooden shack. A thread of gray smoke curled from the shack's chimney pipe, battling the wind. Shelter, just for a moment, a place to think. Clutching her valise, she abandoned the relative safety of the platform and plunged into the street. The mud grabbed at her, trying to pull her down. She stumbled, catching herself, her hands plunging into the icy muck. She didn't cry out. She had forgotten how. She reached the stable, her lungs burning, her body shaking so violently she could barely stand. The stable door was slightly ajar, banging rhythmically against its frame in the wind. She slipped inside. The darkness was thick, smelling of wet hay, old leather, and the sharp ammonia of horses. But it was, crucially, out of the direct assault of the rain. Wind whistled through the gaps in the planking, but the solid roof was a blessing. She found an empty stall in the back, the straw mostly dry, and sank onto it. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them, and pressed her face into the damp wool of her skirt. She did not weep. The cold had frozen the tears inside her. She just shivered, a deep, rattling tremor that shook her to her very soul. Reed Callahan saw the light of the Galloway saloon and cursed it. He'd been pushing the herd for 48 hours straight, a long, miserable drive from the high country, trying to beat this storm. He'd lost. He and his men had gotten the cattle into the south pasture, but the sky had opened up on them in the last 2 miles. He was soaked, aching, and the old wound in his leg throbbed with the cold. He'd left his men at the bunkhouse and ridden the last half-mile to his own place, the old relay station at the edge of town. It wasn't much, just the stable for his horses and the one-room shack he called home. But it was his. No one asked him questions here. His horse. Buck snorted and shook his heavy head as Reed dismounted. The rain was streaming from the brim of his hat. "I know, boy, I hear ya. Let's get you dry." He shoved the groaning stable door open, the one with the broken hinge he kept meaning to fix. He led Buck into the familiar darkness, his movements automatic. He reached for the lantern by the door, his fingers stiff and numb as he struck a match. The small flame caught, and he lit the wick, The lantern cast a weak, oily glow. He hung it on its peg and turned to the horse. He uncinched the saddle, his hands working the cold, wet leather. He lifted the heavy saddle free, and as he turned to set it on the rail, he froze. He heard a sound. It was not a horse. It was not the wind. It was the sharp, terrified intake of a human breath. His hand didn't go to his gun. The heavy coat was still on his saddle, the leather loop tight. His hand went to the pitchfork leaning against the stall. He grabbed it, his knuckles white. "Who's in here?" His voice was a low growl, rough from the trail and disuse. Silence, only the roar of the wind and the drumming of rain on the roof. "I said, who's in here?" he repeated, stepping out of the main passage, holding the lantern high. The light found her. She was huddled in the back stall, on his cleanest hay. A woman. She looked like a drowned thing, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes wide and luminous with terror in the lantern light. She wasn't from Galloway. He knew every face in this town. This was a new one, an eastern one. Clara scrambled back, hitting the rough planks of the stall wall. "Please, I mean no harm. The stage, it just arrived. I was trying to get out of the rain." Her voice was soft, educated. It was the kind of voice that broke rules and expected others to fix them. Reed hated that kind of voice. "This is a stable, ma'am. It's for horses, not people." "I know. I'm sorry. I didn't know where else to go." "The saloon." She trailed off, a violent shiver seizing her. Reed let out a long breath. He was tired. He was cold. And he had no patience for this. But he wasn't a man who could leave a dog to freeze. And this woman looked worse off than any dog. "You'll die of cold in here," he said, his voice flat. "The damp will get in your lungs by morning." She just stared at him, unable to form a reply. He jammed the pitchfork back into the hay bale. He turned his back on her, focusing on his horse, rubbing the animal down with a rough burlap sack. He worked with an angry, efficient energy. He could feel her watching him. After a long minute, he slung his saddlebags over one shoulder and grabbed the lantern. He didn't look at her. "Come on. You can use the shack till the storm passes." He didn't wait for an answer. He walked out of the stable, back into the deluge. He heard a small cry, a scramble, and the sound of her muddy boots slipping as she hurried to follow him. He kicked open the door to the shack. It was one room, dark and cold. The embers in the small pot-bellied stove glowing a faint, dying red. He stepped inside, and Clara hovered on the doorstep, afraid to enter, afraid to be left behind. Water was puddling around her feet. "You're letting the storm in," he said gruffly. "Get inside and shut the door." She did, closing it with a quiet click. The sound of the storm instantly became muffled, a distant roar rather than a present assault. Reed ignored her. He dropped his saddlebags by the door and shrugged off his heavy, soaking duster, hanging it on a peg. He moved to the stove, grabbed the poker, and broke up the embers. He tossed in a few pieces of kindling, then 2 split logs. He knelt, blowing on the embers until a small flame licked up the wood. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hiss of the new fire and the drumming of the rain on the tin roof. "You got a name?" he asked, his back still to her. Clara Whitmore. Reed Callahan." He stood and turned, finally looking at her in the faint light from the stove's grate. She was a mess, shivering so hard her teeth were chattering, her fine clothes ruined. I don't mean to impose, Mr. Callahan," she stammered. "If there's a boarding house, I can go there in the morning." "Mrs. Gables," he said. "She locks her door at dusk, and she doesn't open it for strangers, not without a good word from someone she trusts." "I am a schoolteacher," Clara offered, the words sounding weak and foolish. Reed grunted. He struck another match and lit the hurricane lamp on the small, rough-hewn table. The room sprang into view. It was painfully sparse. A narrow cot against the far wall, a table with one chair, a dry sink, and shelves loaded with tins and sacks of flour. It was a room built for survival. not comfort. The lamplight illuminated his face, and Clara had to physically stop herself from gasping. She hadn't seen it in the stable. It was a scar, an old, silvered white line that started at his left temple, cut a shallow groove across his cheekbone, and disappeared into the dark stubble of his jaw. It pulled the corner of his eye down just slightly, giving him a permanent expression of weary vigilance. As he moved to fill a coffee pot with water from the bucket, she saw his hands. The knuckles were scarred, the right hand marked with a puckered, star-shaped brand. Reed caught her gaze. He knew that look. It was always the same: pity, curiosity, or revulsion. He hated all three. He turned his head, instinctively hiding the scarred side of his face. "Polite folks call it starin'," he said, his voice low. Clara flushed, a wave of heat rising over her cold skin. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Everyone means to." "Was it the war?" she asked softly, trying to fill the awkward silence. His hands stilled. Some of it. He didn't elaborate. He didn't say the saber cut was from Shiloh, but the brand was from a cattle baron in Texas who'd paid him in fire instead of coin. He set the pot on the stove with a sharp, metallic clang. The air in the small shack grew thick. The stove was putting out real heat now, and it turned the room into a suffocatingly small space. The wind hit the shack with a sudden, violent gust, making the entire structure shudder. A crack of thunder exploded directly overhead. It was so loud, so sudden, that Clara cried out and jumped back, stumbling against the table. In the same instant, a flash of lightning illuminated the world, turning the shack's single window into a sheet of pure, blinding white. The light lasted only a second, but it burned an image into Reed's mind. Clara, standing in the center of the room, her body starkly outlined. The soaking wet wool of her dress clung to every curve. It was no longer clothing. It was a second skin. He saw the dip of her waist, the swell of her hip, the full, high shape of her breasts. The nipples peaked and hard against the fabric from the cold. The world plunged back into the dim, oily lamplight. Reed's breath hitched. He turned away sharply, his whole body tense. He stared at the wall, at the rows of tins, at anything but her. He was a man who had lived on his own for 6 years. His interactions were with horses, cattle, and the gruff men he hired for drives. This was a complication he did not need. Clara was frozen, her arms crossed over her chest. She knew what he had seen. She could feel the heat of that momentary, stark appraisal. She was humiliated, cold, and terrified. "You need to get out of that dress," Reed said. His voice was flat, directed at the floorboards. Clara's blood ran cold. "What did you say?" He turned slowly, his face a hard mask. He kept his eyes level with hers, refusing to look down. "I said, you'll catch pneumonia. That dress is a shroud. You'll be dead by dawn." He was right. The cold was inside her now, a deep, shaking ache in her bones. He didn't wait for her permission. He moved to a small wooden chest at the foot of his cot, opened it, and pulled out a long, heavy wool shirt. It was clean, smelling faintly of soap and wood smoke. He tossed it onto the one chair. "Put that on." He then grabbed his heavy canvas coat from the peg, the one he'd worn over his duster. He walked to her. He was close now. She could smell the rain on him, the scent of horse and leather, and the faint, metallic smell of the cold. He held the coat open, a silent command. "I can't," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Can't what? Get warm. I cannot undress. Not here, in front of you." A muscle in his scarred cheek twitched. "Ma'am, I have seen things in field hospitals that would make a minister renounce God. Your modesty is the last thing on my mind. My fire, my shack. You get warm, or you get out. Your choice." He was harsh, but he was not cruel. She knew, somewhere deep inside, that he was trying to save her from her own pride. "Turn around," he said, his voice softer, resigned. "I won't look." He turned his back to her, a rigid, broad-shouldered silhouette. Clara's hands were shaking so badly she couldn't work the buttons. Her fingers were numb, useless. The small, pearl buttons that had seemed so elegant in Boston were now her enemy. A sob of pure, desperate frustration escaped her. "I can't. My fingers, they won't work." Reed stood still for a long count of 10. The rain hammered the roof. He let out a heavy sigh. "Turn your back." She hesitated, then did as he said, presenting her back to him. She heard one heavy boot step. She felt his presence behind her, a wall of heat. "Keep your arms in front of you," he ordered. She crossed her arms over her chest, clutching her own shoulders. She felt his hands at the nape of her neck. They were not gentle. They were calloused and rough. The hands of a man who worked with rope and iron. But they were steady. He worked the top button free, his knuckles brushing the icy skin of her neck. Clara squeezed her eyes shut. This was ruin. This was the very situation she had fled. But the Reverend's touch had been soft and damp. A spider's touch. This was different. This was impersonal. Like a farrier shoeing a horse. Then his hand trembled. It was barely perceptible. A slight jarring of his fingers against her spine as he moved to the second button. But she felt it. This hard, scarred man was affected. The knowledge sent a strange, dangerous current through her. He undid the buttons down to the small of her back. "You can manage the rest," he said, his voice suddenly thick. He stepped back and turned away, facing the stove, with her back still to him. Clara shimmied out of the wet dress, letting it pool at her ankles. The cold air hit her wet chemise, stealing her breath. She tore off the soaked underthings, her body frantic for warmth. She grabbed the wool shirt from the chair. It was huge, made of thick, soft flannel. It smelled of him. It fell to her mid-thighs, a scandalously short, blissfully warm garment. "It's done," she whispered. Reed turned. He picked up the heavy coat. He didn't toss it to her. He stepped forward and draped it over her shoulders, pulling the collar closed at her throat. His hands rested on her shoulders for a fraction of a second too long, his palms heavy and warm through the fabric. Clara had to tilt her head back to look at him. His eyes, she saw now they were a clear, cold gray, like a winter sky, were on her face. He was not looking at her legs, bare beneath the shirt. He was looking at her eyes. And Clara, who had fled the sophisticated cruelty of the East, felt a powerful, terrifying pull toward this quiet, broken man. He was as harsh and unforgiving as the land itself, but he was real. He broke the gaze first. He snatched her wet dress from the floor and hung it on a hook near the stove, where it immediately began to steam. The reality of the night settled back in. The shack was tiny. The storm was not a passing shower. It was a siege. The wind howled, rattling the single window in its frame. "You should sleep," Reed said. He nodded toward the cot. "I can't take your bed, Mr. Callahan. You need to. You're still shivering." He took the single chair and sat, leaning it back against the wall. "I'll take the chair. Slept in worse." Clara looked at the cot. It was narrow, with one thin mattress and 2 blankets folded at the end. She looked at him, his face etched with exhaustion. "That's not right. We can share the blankets. I'll stay by the stove." Reed looked at her, then at the 2 thin blankets, then at the cot. He let out a short, harsh breath that might have been a laugh. "Ma'am, this ain't some fancy parlor in Boston. One of us takes the bed, the other takes the floor or the chair. With this storm, the floor's a frozen slab. I'm tired. I ain't chivalrous. Take the bed." He was absolute. Clara moved to the cot. She slipped under the top blanket, still wearing his massive coat. She pressed herself against the cold planks of the wall, trying to take up as little space as possible. Reed watched her for a moment. He checked the fire, added 1 more log, and then, to her surprise, he blew out the lamp. The room was plunged into a terrifying, intimate darkness. The only light was the faint red glow from the stove's grate and the periodic, violent flashes of lightning. She heard him move, felt the cot dip as he sat on the edge. He was pulling off his boots. He dropped them, one by one, to the floor. Then, with a sigh of pure, animal exhaustion, He lay down, not under the blanket, but on top of it. He lay on his back, a rigid line of muscle, careful to leave a channel of cold air between them. But the cot was narrow. His arm, from shoulder to elbow, was pressed against the bulk of the coat she wore. They lay in silence, two strangers, inches apart in the dark, while the world tried to tear itself apart outside. An hour passed, or maybe it was only a minute. The only sound was the wind, the rain, and the pop of the stove. "You runnin'?" His voice came out of the blackness, startling her so badly she flinched. I don't know what you mean." "A woman like you," he said, his voice low and tired. Educated voice, soft hands. "You don't come to Galloway, not unless you're running from something awful, or running to something worse." Clara was quiet. The darkness made confession seem possible. "My husband died," she whispered. 2 years ago. Sorry to hear it, but that ain't it. A widow's got prospects. You ain't looking for prospects." The wind screamed, rattling the chimney pipe. "There was a man," she said, her voice barely audible. "A minister, Reverend Barrow. He helped me after my husband passed. He wanted to marry me. He owned the orphanage. He was a pillar of the community." She stopped. She couldn't tell him the rest. Couldn't tell him about the night she'd found the small, bruised girl locked in the attic, or the cold, reptilian look in the Reverend's eyes when she'd confronted him. "When I refused him," she continued, he told people I was unstable, hysterical, that my grief had soured my soul. He turned the entire town against me. I had to leave." Reed was silent for a long time. She could feel the tension in the arm pressed against hers. "So, you came here," he stated. "The last place God thought of. I thought it would be a place where no one knew my name, a place where a person's past didn't matter." "It don't," Reed said, his voice flat. "But the present matters a whole hell of a lot. And right now, the present is that you're freezing." She was. The cold from the wall was seeping into her back, and the shivering had started again, a tremor that shook the entire cot. He cursed, low and soft. "This is stupid." Before she could react, he moved. He shifted, lifting the blanket. "Turn over. Face the wall." "What? You're shaking so hard you're going to break a tooth. Turn over. I'm putting you between me and the wall. It's the only way you'll see morning." "Mr. Callahan, I can't. It's Reed. And you can do it." There was no arguing. It was an order born of pure necessity. Clara turned, her heart hammering, and pressed her face against the cold, rough wood. She felt him move behind her, his body a solid, looming presence. He didn't lie on top of the blanket this time. He slipped under it, pulling it over both of them. He lay on his side, his body curved around hers. Clara went rigid. His chest was a wall of heat against her back, his legs slotted behind hers. He was fully dressed, but she could feel the hard muscle of him, the solid, living warmth. He hesitated, then draped his arm over her waist, pulling her flush against him. "This is for warmth," he growled into her hair. "Nothing more." "I know," she whispered. Though she was terrified, she didn't know at all. His breath was warm on her neck. They lay there, two damaged, breathing creatures huddled against the storm. "The war," she whispered, needing to say something, needing to break the terrible intimacy with words. "Your face, was it the war?" His arm tensed around her. She felt him nod. "Shiloh," he said. His voice was different, distant. "A boy with a saber. He couldn't have been more than 17. He paused. "I killed him. He scarred me. I killed him." "And your hand?" "That wasn't the war. That was peace. A cattleman in Texas who didn't like my price." Clara's heart ached. This man was a tapestry of old wounds. "Why did you come back?" she asked. "After the war?" "For her," he said, and the bitterness in his voice was so profound it made her shiver for a different reason. "Was gone 4 years. Wrote letters. Stopped getting them. Figured they were lost. I walked the last 100 miles. Got home, found her married, to my brother. They'd gotten a letter I was dead. They didn't seem too broken up about it. A betrayal. Different from hers, but the same deep, ragged cut. So I left, he said. Came here, this land. It doesn't lie. It doesn't pretend. It tries to kill you every day. But it's honest about it. The storm raged. The wind howled. But inside the small, dark room, the air was still. The heat from his body was seeping into hers, chasing the deadly cold from her bones. His arm around her waist, which had at first felt like a trap, now felt like the only solid thing in a world that was trying to wash her away. Clara felt the tension in his body ease as his breathing deepened. He was exhausted. He was falling asleep. She lay awake, listening to the rain and the steady rhythm of the heart beating against her back. She had fled one man's suffocating piety only to end up in the arms of a scarred stranger. But as the warmth finally, truly spread through her, Clara Whitmore closed her eyes, and for the first time in a year, she was not afraid. Clara woke to silence. A cold, gray light pressed against the shack's single window. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world scoured clean and steeped in mud. She was alone on the cot. She sat up, clutching the heavy wool shirt. The cabin was cold. The stove was a black, silent iron box. His blankets were gone from the bedroll on the floor. His heavy duster was gone from the peg. For one wild, terrible moment, she thought he had left her, abandoned her in this strange, dead place. Then, through the window, she saw him. He was in the corral, already working, pitching hay to his horses. He moved with a stiff, angry energy. She scrambled off the cot, her bare feet hitting the freezing floorboards. The shame of the night came rushing back, the intimacy, the shared warmth. His body curved around hers, his stories, told in the dark. She had seen this man's wounds, the ones on his skin and the ones in his voice. Her dress, the one he had hung by the stove, was dry. It was stiff, wrinkled, and stained with mud at the hem. But it was dry. She pulled off his shirt, the scent of him, soap and smoke, clinging to her skin. She dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. She felt terribly exposed, as if the walls of the shack had been replaced with glass. She had just finished pinning up her damp hair when the door opened. Reed stood there, framed against the gray morning. He did not look at her. He carried a fresh bucket of water, which he set on the dry sink with a thud. "Stove's cold," he said. It was an accusation. "I am sorry. I did not know how to—" "There's kindling in the box." He moved past her, his presence seeming to suck all the air from the small room. He knelt, his back to her, and with a few efficient, angry movements, he had a new fire crackling. The silence was worse than the storm. "I'll go," Clara said, her voice small. "I can go to the boarding house now. Mrs. Gables, you said I will—" "It's Sunday," he bit out, standing. "She'll be at services till noon. After that, she'll be cleaning. She won't answer the door." Clara's face fell. Of course. Sunday. She had lost track of the days. Reed grabbed his hat. "I'm going to the store. For provisions. Just stay here. Bolt the door behind me. Don't open it. For anyone." "Mr. Callahan," she began. "Reed," he corrected her, his voice harsh. "Reed, I have some money. Not much, but I can pay for—" "I'm not taking your money." He pulled his hat low, shadowing his face, hiding the scar. "Bolt the door." He was gone, the door shutting firmly behind him, followed by the heavy, metallic scrape of the outside bar sliding into place. He had locked her in. Clara sank onto the single chair, her hands trembling. It was not a kindness. It was a practicality. He was hiding her, hiding his complication. She was a stray dog he hadn't figured out how to get rid of. Reed Callahan walked the main street of Galloway, and Galloway watched. The town was a long scar of mud. The boardwalks were slick with it. He kept his head down, but he could feel the eyes. From the saloon, where a few early drinkers were already posted. From the livery. From the windows of the houses set back from the street. He entered the general store. The bell above the door jangled. A sound he despised. Martha Gable, a woman built like a stack of flour sacks, was sweeping mud from the entryway. She looked up, her small, sharp eyes widening. "Reed Callahan, you're a sight. Storm treat you poorly." "Mornin'. Martha, need supplies." "So I see." She followed him as he moved through the cramped aisles. He grabbed a sack of Arbuckle's coffee. "Coffee?" Martha's eyebrows rose. "Since when do you drink coffee?" "Since I ran out of chicory." He lied. He grabbed a 2-pound sack of flour, then another. He took beans, a side of salt pork, and 3 tins of peaches. Martha's gaze sharpened. "That's a lot of food. Reed, you usually buy for one, and you usually buy on Saturday." "I was busy Saturday. The storm." He kept his back to her, his voice flat. He was counting. 2 people. 3 meals a day. "How long?" "I heard the stage got in last night," Martha said, her voice casual, but the question sharp as a skinning knife. "Driver said he dropped a passenger, a woman, all alone, right into the deluge. Funny thing, she never made it to my place, and she ain't at the saloon." Reed's shoulders tensed. He set his items on the counter. "That'll be all." Martha leaned forward, her eyes bright with suspicion. "It's a small town. Reed, a woman can't just disappear. Not unless she's got help. You ain't seen anyone wandering out by your place, have you? A stray?" He met her gaze. His own was cold, gray, and empty as the prairie sky. "I've seen what I always see. Martha, mud and horses." He paid, his coins clanging on the wooden counter. He packed his supplies into his saddlebags. "You let me know if you hear anything," she called after him. "It ain't safe for a lone woman out here, not at all." He didn't answer. He walked out, the bell jangling his exit. He knew that by noon, the entire town would be buzzing. Reed Callahan had bought coffee and food for 2, and the stagecoach woman was missing. When he returned, the bar was scraped back from the door. He entered and found her standing by the cot, her small valise packed and sitting at her feet. She was wearing her mud-stained dress, the wool coat he had given her folded neatly on the mattress. "You're back," she said, relieved. "I am." He set the bags on the table, pulling out the coffee. The smell filled the small room. "I am ready to go. I can wait for Mrs. Gable now." "No." She looked up, confused. "But you said she would be back from services." "You ain't going to Mrs. Gable's?" "I do not understand. I cannot stay here. Mr. Callahan." "Reed. And I know you can't." He turned, his face a hard mask. "You think Martha Gable is going to rent a room to a woman who spent the night in a man's shack? A man like me? You'll be on the street before you can get the question out. They'll call you a soiled dove. Or worse." Clara's blood ran cold. He was right. She had been so focused on survival. She hadn't considered the implications. She had traded one scandal for a new, and perhaps more dangerous. "One? But what am I to do?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "I have nowhere to go. I cannot go back east. I cannot—" "Stop!" He held up a hand. He hated a woman's tears. They were a currency he didn't understand. He walked to the stove, poured water into the coffee pot, and dumped in a handful of grounds. He did not have a percolator. He boiled it, cowboy style. He stared into the fire. He was trapped by his own gruff code of honor. He'd saved her from the storm, and in doing so, had ruined her in the eyes of the town. "I need work," Clara said, her voice stronger now, laced with a desperation that bordered on anger. "I am a teacher. I can find work. I need a few days. That is all. Just a few days to find a position. In the town school or on a ranch, I can earn my keep," Reed grunted. Skepticism thickened the sound. "Earn your keep? Ma'am, you're from Boston. Your hands are soft. The keep out here is hard." "Then let me try," she insisted, stepping toward him. "I can cook. I can clean. I can mend your clothes. I can learn to help with the horses." He turned at that. a dark, humorless smile twisting his scarred face. "The horses. These ain't ponies for some city park. They're half wild. They'll kill you." "I am not afraid of work." She held his gaze. "I am only afraid of being helpless. Please, 2 days. 3. Just until I can find lodging and employment." He looked at her for a long, heavy minute. He saw the pride in her eyes. It was the same stupid, stubborn pride that kept him alive. She wasn't asking for charity. She was asking for a chance, and she was right. He had put her in this position. "All right," he said, the words torn from him. "A few days." "But you ain't a guest." He pointed to the corner. "The horses. They get fed and watered before we do. Every morning, sunup. Then, you handle the cooking. I am tired of my own bacon. And this shack, it's a mess. I want it clean. You pull your weight, or you're out. Deal?" Clara nodded, a wave of profound relief making her weak. "Deal. Good. Now, make the coffee. And use the egg trick to settle the grounds, if you know how." He grabbed his hat and duster and went back out, leaving her alone in his home. And so, the strangest, most dangerous kind of life began. A silent truce, drawn in the small, one-room shack. The boundaries were unspoken, but they were as rigid as iron. He took the floor, every night. He spread his bedroll by the stove, giving her the cot. It was a gesture of chivalry that embarrassed them both. He would wait until she was under her blanket, her back turned, before he would even remove his boots. The nights were the worst. The shack was too small. Every time she turned on the cot, the rope frame groaned, and she knew he heard it. She could hear him breathe. Sometimes, he'd cry out in his sleep, a low, strangled word about the line or water. She would lie awake, rigid, her heart pounding, until his breathing evened out again. The days were a different kind of tension. They were a choreography of avoidance. She learned his routines. He was up before the sun, a shadow moving in the dark. He would dress and be out to the horses before she even lit the lamp. She would rise, her body aching, and get the stove going. She would make the coffee, strong and bitter, and fry the salt pork. They ate in silence. The table was barely big enough for 2. Their knees would brush. A sudden, searing contact that made them both flinch and pull away. She would set his plate down, her fingers accidentally grazing his scarred hand. He would recoil as if she'd burned him. After the first day, he had watched her clumsy attempts to cook and clean. He'd said nothing, but the next morning, he returned from the stable and began hammering. He built her 2 new shelves by the dry sink. He planed a rough board to make a cutting surface. He even found an old crate and made her a small stool. He did it all without a word, as if he were simply fixing a fence. But she knew. It was his way of accepting her presence. She held up her end of the bargain. She learned to cook on the pot-bellied stove, to bake passable biscuits in a Dutch oven set in the embers. She scrubbed the floorboards, mended his shirts, and declared war on the dust. The horses were the hardest. The first time she carried 2 heavy buckets of water from the pump. She spilled half of it, and her arms felt as though they would tear from their sockets. Reed watched her, his face impassive. "Use the yoke," he said, pointing to a wooden contraption she hadn't understood. He showed her how to settle it on her shoulders. He adjusted the straps, his hands rough on her wool-covered shoulders. She stood frozen, smelling the leather and sweat on him. "This balances the load," he said, his voice low, his face close to hers. "Let your legs do the work, not your arms." She learned. She learned to face the horses, to speak in a low, calm voice as he did. She learned the smell of hay and sweet feed, and she learned to see him. She saw the way he moved around the animals, a different man from the one in the shack. He was gentle. His scarred hands, so abrupt and harsh with the world, were infinitely patient as he checked a hoof or calmed a skittish mare. She, in turn, worked on the shack. She had found a loose brick in the hearth, and the mortar was crumbling. It was dangerous. The fire too close to the wood. "This needs fixing," she'd said one evening. "It's held this long," he'd replied, oiling a bridle. She didn't argue. The next day, while he was gone, She found clay by the small creek behind the stable. She mixed it with ash, the way she'd seen men do back east. She got soot on her face, in her hair. When he came back, he found her on her knees, her hands and arms covered in gray mud, carefully repacking the hearth. He stopped in the doorway, stock still. He watched her for a full minute, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was filthy, her hair coming undone, but she was rebuilding his home. "That's chimney mud," he said, his voice quiet. Clara jumped, startled. I hope you do not mind. It was a fire hazard." He did not answer. He just watched her, his gray eyes unreadable. He had dreams of her. He'd dream of the war, of the field hospital, but it would be her face, covered in soot, bending over him. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, his body tight and aching. The third evening, he came in from the stables, moving slowly. He was hiding it, but she saw him wince as he reached to hang his duster. "You are hurt," she stated. "I'm fine." Pulled a muscle. He sat at the table, his back to her, and began cleaning his revolver, a ritual she was coming to recognize. "Let me see. I know something of liniments. I don't need... Turn around. Read." The command in her voice was quiet, but it was the voice of the schoolteacher, the voice of a woman used to being obeyed. He hesitated. Then, slowly, he stood and turned his back to her. "It's nothing. An old wound. Take off your shirt." He let out a sharp, angry breath. But he unbuttoned his shirt and shrugged it off, hissing in pain as the movement pulled his skin. Clara drew in a sharp breath. His back was a map of old miseries. White, silvery scars crisscrossed his muscles. But there was one place, high on his left shoulder blade, that was different. It was a puckered, angry-looking thing, a deep indentation where something had torn through him long ago. Now, it was swollen, an ugly, inflamed purple. "This is from the war," she whispered. "Shrapnel," he grated. It flares up when I work it too hard, or when the cold gets in." "Sit." She pushed him, gently, onto the chair. She went to the stove, poured hot water into the basin. She brought it, and a clean rag, to the table. She dipped the rag, but as she reached for him, she saw the linen was too rough. It would chafe the angry skin. She hesitated. Then she put the rag down. She dipped her own hands into the hot water. She let them soak for a moment, then brought them, warm and dripping, to his back. The moment her bare hands touched his skin, Reed's entire body seized. He became a rigid statue of muscle, a deep, shuddering tremor running through him. "Don't," he growled, his voice thick. "Be still," she commanded, her voice soft but firm. "I am only trying to help." She placed her palm flat against the hot, swollen skin. He flinched, but he did not pull away. She began to work, her fingers pressing gently, then more firmly, rubbing the heat from the water into the tight, knotted muscle around the old wound. She felt the tremor in him. It was not from pain. It was from the touch itself. She realized, with a sudden, profound ache in her chest, that it had likely been years since anyone had touched this man with kindness. His brother had betrayed him. The world had scarred him. He had wrapped himself in a shell of solitude. She worked in silence. The only sounds were the pop of the fire, the ticking of the small clock he kept on the shelf, and his rough, controlled breathing. Her hands moved over his shoulders, his back, learning the shape of him, the hard lines of muscle, the geography of his pain. He was trembling. His hands, resting on his knees, were clenched into white-knuckled fists. He was enduring this. He was letting her. When she finished, she dried his back with a soft, clean cloth. "It will feel better in the morning," she said, her voice husky. He did not speak. He just nodded, his head bowed. He grabbed his shirt and pulled it on, buttoning it quickly. He did not look at her. He could not. He picked up his gun, as if to resume his cleaning, but his hands were shaking too badly. He set it down, stood, and walked out of the shack. He stood on the porch for a full hour, in the cold, clear dark, until the tremor finally left him. That night, the dream found her. She was back in Boston, the Reverend's parlor, the heavy velvet curtains, the smell of old books and his sickly sweet cologne. He was smiling, his voice soft, but his eyes were hard. He was backing her into a corner. "You are my ward. Clara, you are my responsibility. You will do as you are told." She was pushing at his chest. "No, please, leave me be." Reed, asleep on the floor, woke instantly. Her voice, it was soft, but filled with a terror that made his blood run cold. "Clara," he said into the dark. She did not answer. He heard her sit up on the cot. He got to his feet. "Clara, you're dreamin'." He moved toward her. In the faint moonlight from the window, he could see her. She was sitting upright, her eyes wide open, but they were blind. She was seeing something else. "Please," she whimpered, her hands clutching the blanket. Please, don't make me." He reached for her, his hand landing on her shoulder. "Ma'am, wake up. You're safe." His touch broke the spell, but not in the way he intended. She gasped, a raw, desperate sound. She was not in Boston. She was here, in the dark, with a man. Her nightmare twisted, latching onto the present. She grabbed him. Her fingers dug into the fabric of his shirt, pulling him down toward her. Her eyes were wild, desperate, and unseeing. "Just do it," she moaned, the words a low, guttural plea that tore through the silence of the room. "Just do it, Cowboy, before I change my mind." The words hit Reed like a physical blow. He froze. Her hands were on him. The scent of her, warm from sleep, filled his senses. The memory of her skin under his hands, of her body outlined in the lightning, of her shape pressed against him in the dark. It all came crashing back. The tension of the past days, the proximity, the unspoken awareness, it snapped. He was not a good man. He was a man who had been alone for too long. He fell to his knees beside the cot. His hands finding her face, he covered her mouth with his. It was not a kiss. It was an explosion. It was rough, punishing, and desperate. It was all his hunger, all his loneliness, all his rage at the world, poured into one brutal act. He tasted the salt of her fear. For 1/2 second, she responded. She clung to him, her body meeting his, a drowning woman grabbing for a log. And that is what stopped him. Her response, her terrified, desperate grip, the words, "Before I change my mind." This was not desire, this was surrender. This was a woman so broken by her past that she was begging for the end, for the violation to just be over with. He was doing exactly what the Reverend, what the world had done to her. He was taking... Reed tore himself away from her. He recoiled, scrambling backward, and slammed into the table. The coffee pot and tin cups crashed to the floor. He was breathing in great, ragged gasps, his heart hammering against his ribs. Clara was huddled on the cot, her hand to her mouth, her eyes finally, horribly, clear. She was awake. She was seeing him. "I am not him," Reed growled, his voice a hoarse whisper. He was shaking, not with desire, but with a profound, terrifying self-loathing. He pointed a finger at her, though he could barely see her in the dark. "I am not that man. I am not a man who takes a woman when she is weak, when she is in her fear. You understand me?" He was shouting now, his voice cracking. "I am not him." He grabbed his duster from the peg. He fumbled with the door, yanked it open, and stormed out into the cold, black night. He did not stop walking until he was 1/2 mile from the shack, the icy air burning his lungs. Clara did not move for an hour. She just sat on the cot, shaking in a silence broken only by her own quiet, gasping sobs. He did not return. The gray dawn came, colder this time. Clara rose, her body a single, dull ache. She felt empty, scoured out. He had not come back. He had left. This time, for good. She got the fire going, her hands automatic. She found the spilled coffee grounds, the overturned cups. She cleaned up his mess. Then she saw his bedroll, still neatly tied by the stove. His saddle was still in the stable. He had not left. He was just gone. She opened the shack door. The world was quiet. She went to the pump to get water. And there, on the porch, were his clothes, the muddy, wet things he had worn out into the night, shed sometime in the dark, and left for her. It was a silent, angry demand, part of their bargain. She looked at them. Then she looked inside and saw the clothes from the first night, the ones he'd worn when he pulled her from the storm. She took them all. She took the heavy coarse wool shirt he had lent her. She took the muddy things from the porch. She took her basin and the block of lye soap. She went to the water pump. Her hands were raw, her knuckles split from the cold and the work. She began to wash. She scrubbed the mud from his jeans. She scrubbed the grime from his shirt collar. She worked until her arms ached and her fingers were numb. She was washing his shirt, the one she had worn, when the tears came. They were not the hot, terrified tears of the night before. They were cold, quiet tears of a different kind of grief. He had stopped. He had held her ruin in his hands. And he had stopped. He had pulled away. He had yelled at her. He had called himself a name she did not understand, but he had not been the Reverend. He had not been the man who smiled and quoted scripture and touched her with soft, damp hands. Reed was harsh. He was scarred. He was angry, but he was not that. A tear fell onto the rough flannel, mixing with the soap. She scrubbed it, as if she could wash away her past, his anger, and the terrible, complicated mess they were in. She cried for the man who had stormed out into the night, not because of what he had done, but because of what he had refused to do. He returned just after sunrise. Clara was still at the pump, her hands submerged in the icy water, her knuckles red and cracked. She looked up as his shadow fell over her. His face was drawn, etched with a night's worth of battling his own demons. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked at the pile of his clean, wet clothes hanging over the corral fence. He looked at her, at the basin full of soapy water, at her raw hands. He said nothing. He took the basin from her, his fingers brushing hers, and dumped the gray water onto the mud. He took the yoke from her shoulders, picked up the buckets, and went to the pump himself. He worked it with a steady, rhythmic anger, the squeal of the handle the only sound in the morning air. The silence held for 2 days. It was a new, fragile, and terrible kind of quiet. It was no longer the silence of avoidance. It was the silence of a shared, shameful secret. They had stood at a precipice, and he had been the one to pull them back. Now, neither knew where to stand. They ate, they worked. He mended harness. She cooked. They were 2 people in a cage too small for one. On the 3rd morning, Clara knew she could not stay. It was not his anger that drove her out. It was his control. It was the simmering, banked fire she saw in his eyes every time he looked at her. He had not taken what she offered in her nightmare, and that refusal hung between them, a debt she could not repay. She put on her only dress, the mud-stained wool, and her ruined boots. She brushed her hair until it shone, pinning it up in a severe knot. She had to be the school teacher again. She had to be someone else. "I'm going into town," she said. Reed was sharpening a knife by the stove. The blade made a soft, rasping sound against the stone. He didn't look up. "Why?" "For work. I told you. I am a teacher." "There's no work for you here. Clara." He tested the blade with his thumb. "I have to try. I will not be. I cannot stay here." He finally looked up. His gray eyes were flat. "You'll be back before noon." He was wrong. Galloway by day was even more desolate than it had been in the storm. The street was a river of mud. The boardwalks were patched and broken. Men stopped what they were doing to watch her pass. Their stares were blunt, appraisive, stripping her bare in the cold morning light. She saw Martha Gable watching her from the general store window, her arms crossed, her face a mask of sour judgment. Clara ignored them. She kept her chin high and walked directly to the small, clapboard building with a crooked bell tower. The schoolhouse. A man was outside, hammering a loose shutter. He was dressed in black, a stark figure against the gray wood. He was thin, with a narrow face and eyes that were too close together. "Can I help you, ma'am?" His voice was reedy, carrying a false note of piety. "I am looking for the head of the school. I am a teacher." The man stopped hammering. He turned, his gaze sweeping over her, noting the mud on her hem, the fine quality of her ruined dress, and the fact that she was alone. "I am Reverend Pike. I am the school board, the pastor, and the town council, such as it is." He gave a thin, wet smile. "And we are in need of a teacher. The last one, a young man from Ohio, lasted 2 weeks, said the children were uncivilized. I am not easily frightened. Reverend, are you not?" He looked her over again. "You're from the East. Your voice. I am. My luggage was lost. I arrived in the storm 3 nights ago." "Ah, yes, the storm." His eyes sharpened. "The stage driver mentioned a passenger. We had all assumed you moved on. Where have you been staying, Miss?" "It is Mrs. Whitmore. I am a widow, and I was fortunate to find shelter from the storm." She held his gaze, refusing to be the first to look away. "I am available to start immediately." Reverend Pike was in a bind. He had 8 children enrolled and no one to teach them. This woman, despite her questionable arrival, spoke like a lady. "Very well. Mrs. Whitmore. On a temporary basis, the salary is $12 a month, paid in script at the general store. We expect the teacher to abide by a strict moral code. This is a God-fearing town. I would expect nothing less. Reverend, you will, of course, provide me with your letters of recommendation, a certificate of moral standing from your previous parish." Clara's heart hammered. "They were in my trunk, the one that was lost. I have written back east for copies, but the mail is so slow." Pike's thin lips tightened. He did not like this. He did not like it at all, but he needed a teacher. "Very well, temporarily. You may begin tomorrow, 9 o'clock, but I will expect those papers. Mrs. Whitmore, good day." He turned back to his hammering. A clear dismissal. Clara walked back to the shack, her heart a strange, volatile mix of triumph and terror. She had a job. She had a purpose. When she told Reed, he only grunted. "Pike, he's a snake in a pious skin. Be careful of him." "I can handle Reverend Pike. Can you?" He tossed a log into the stove. "We'll see." The first day was a small, fragile victory. The schoolhouse was cold, smelling of mice and old ashes. The 8 children, ranging in age from 6 to 13, were rough. They stared at her with the same feral curiosity as the men in the street. But Clara knew this. She knew children. She put them to work. She had them clean the slates, sweep the floor, and recite their letters. She told them a story. Not from the Bible, from a book of Greek myths. She told them of Icarus. By the time the 3 o'clock bell rang, she had their attention. A small boy, Eli, even gave her a bruised-looking apple. She walked back to the shack with a lighter step. Reed was waiting. He was not at the shack. He was just there, at the edge of town, leaning against the corral, watching the road. He was too far for her to call to, but she saw him. As soon as he saw her, he turned and walked back to the shack. He was guarding her. The realization sent a strange, unwelcome warmth through her. This became their new routine. He would rise in the dark. She would rise after him, make her way to the schoolhouse. He would be somewhere, watching. In the evenings, they would eat in silence. The tension was still there, but the work had blunted its edge. It lasted 4 days. On the 5th day, Martha Gable paid a visit to Reverend Pike. She had a basket of scones and a mouthful of poison. "A word, Reverend, about your new teacher, Mrs. Whitmore. She seems to be managing." "Managing? Reverend, do you know where she is living?" "She informed me she had found shelter." "Shelter. She is living in the shack with Reed Callahan." Pike's narrow face went pale. "Callahan? The scarred man? The one who never comes to services?" "The very same," Martha hissed, her eyes bright. "She's been there since the night she arrived. In the storm, a lone woman, in a one-room shack, with him, for almost a week. It is a scandal. Reverend, an open sore on this town. Reverend Pike's piety turned to a cold, righteous fury. The next morning, Clara arrived at the schoolhouse to find Reverend Pike waiting for her on the steps. "Mrs. Whitmore, we must speak." "Reverend, is something wrong? I have been made aware of your living situation." His voice was low, trembling with disgust. "You have been cohabitating with a man, a sinner, a man of violence." Clara recoiled. "I have not. It is not what you think. He gave me shelter from the storm. I have been working for my keep. Do not play me for a fool." "Woman," Pike snapped. "You have been living under his roof, in his home. You came to me with lies, pretending to be a decent widow. When you are a fallen woman. You have brought your filth into my school. How dare you? I am a teacher. I have done nothing. You have done everything. You have corrupted the children. That is a lie." "Is it?" Pike smiled, a cold, cruel twisting of his lips. "Mrs. Gable, Mrs. Hemlock." Two women, the mothers of 4 of her students, emerged from the general store. They crossed the street, their faces hard. "We are taking our children, Mrs. Whitmore," one said. "We will not have them taught by a whore." The word hit Clara like a slap. "No," Clara whispered. "Please, it is not true." "It is true enough," Reverend Pike said. "You are dismissed. Mrs. Whitmore, your presence is no longer required in Galloway. I suggest you be on the next stagecoach out, whichever direction it is heading." The women marched into the schoolhouse. Clara heard them telling the children to gather their things, their voices loud and sharp. "Get away from her. Eli, don't you touch her." The children filed out, confused, some of them crying. Eli, the small boy who had given her the apple, looked at her, his face crumpled in fear, before his mother grabbed his arm and yanked him away. Clara was left alone on the steps of the empty schoolhouse. The bell chimed 9 o'clock. The start of her day. It took her an hour to walk back to the shack. She was not crying. She was frozen. She had been ruined. Again. When she got back, Reed was not there. The shack was empty. It was a relief. She could not bear to face him, to tell him that his act of kindness had destroyed her. Reed was in the saloon. He rarely went in, but he needed to buy tobacco. He stood at the bar, waiting for the barkeep. The room was quiet, save for 2 men playing cards, and 1 man, drunk, at a table in the corner. Jedediah, a ranch hand from a neighboring outfit, a man with a loud mouth and a small brain. Heard Pike finally ran her off. Jed slurred, looking at his companion. "Ran who off?" "The schoolmarm, the fancy one, the one who's been shacked up with Callahan." Reed froze. His back was to the room, but every muscle in his body went tight. "That right?" Jed's friend chuckled. "Figured that wouldn't last, a woman like that." "Wonder what she's charging him for room and board," Jed laughed. A wet, ugly sound. "Hell, with a face like Callahan's. She probably has to pay him. A marked-up steer and a marked-up whore. They make a fine pair." The saloon went dead silent. The only sound was the scrape of Reed's boot as he turned. His face was terrifying. The scar was livid, white against the sudden, dark flush of his skin. His gray eyes were not cold. They were burning. "What did you say?" Reed asked. His voice was not loud. It was soft, deadly. "Jed, drunk and stupid. Tried to stand. I said you and your—" He never finished. Reed crossed the room in 2 strides. He didn't punch. He hit. His first blow was a backhand, open palm, that cracked across Jed's face with the sound of a whip. It shattered his nose and sent him sprawling back over the table. Jed's friend went for his gun. Reed didn't even look at him. He kicked the table over, grabbed Jed by the shirt front, and hauled him to his feet. "Say her name," Reed growled, his voice thick with a violence that shocked the room. I ain't—" Reed hit him again, a closed fist, this time a short, brutal blow to the ribs. Jed screamed as a bone snapped. "Say her name!" Please, Callahan, I was just—" Reed hit him a third time in the gut, driving the air from his lungs. He dropped Jed to the floor, a gasping, bloody mess. The barkeep had his shotgun out. "That's enough! Reed, that's enough!" The sheriff, a weary man named Brody, pushed through the saloon doors, his hand on his own gun. "Reed, back away! Now!" Reed stood over the broken man, his chest heaving. He looked at Brody, his eyes still wild. "He's under arrest. Reed, for assault. You nearly killed him." Reed didn't resist. The rage left him as quickly as it had come, leaving behind a cold, shaking emptiness. He put his hands out. Brody cuffed him. "Get the doc for Jed," Brody said, hauling Reed toward the door. "And someone, find that woman. Tell her what this fool just did." Clara ran. She ran through the mud, her heart pounding in her throat. Martha Gable had told her, a cruel satisfaction in her eyes. "Your man's been arrested. Nearly killed Jedediah over you." She burst into the small jailhouse. Sheriff Brody was at his desk. Reed was in the single cell, standing, his back to her, staring at the small, barred window. His knuckles were raw and bleeding. "Sheriff, please!" Clara gasped, leaning on the desk. "Ma'am." Brody looked up, his face tired. "You shouldn't be here. Let him go. It was my fault. It was because of me. What it was about ain't the issue. It's what he did. Jed's got a broken nose and 2 cracked ribs. He's pressing charges." "How much?" Clara asked, her voice desperate. "The fine. The damages. How much?" Brody sighed. He hadn't seen this coming. "The doc's bill will be $3. Jed's. He's scared. He'll drop the charges for another $5. And damages to the saloon. Call it $10. All told, it's a steep price, ma'am." $10. It was almost everything she had. It was her stagecoach ticket to anywhere else. She didn't hesitate. She opened her valise, which she had clutched all the way from the shack. She pulled out the small cloth purse. She counted out 10 silver dollars and a few smaller coins. She pushed them across the desk. "There, that is all of it. Now let him go." Brody looked at the money. He looked at her. He looked at Reed's rigid back. He sighed, took the money, and unlocked the cell. "You're free, Callahan. You're a lucky man, and a damn fool. Stay out of my saloon. Stay out of my town." Reed walked out of the cell. He didn't look at Clara. He didn't look at the sheriff. He grabbed his hat from the peg and walked out the door, into the fading light. Clara gathered her empty purse and followed him. The walk back to the shack was the longest mile of her life. The sun was setting, bleeding purple and red into the wet sky. A cold wind was rising. Rain began to fall. Not a deluge, a cold, miserable drizzle. They walked in silence. He walked 10 feet ahead of her, his shoulders set, his pace just short of punishing. She was ruined. She had lost her job. She had lost her reputation. She had just given away her last dollar to free a man who would not even look at her, a man who had become an outcast because of her. Reverend Barrow's voice came back to her. "You are a poison, Clara. You ruin everything you touch." They reached the shack. He pushed the door open and stood aside, a gesture of cold, automatic courtesy, for her to enter. She walked into the one-room prison. The air was thick, suffocating. He followed her in and shut the door, plunging the room into near darkness. He struck a match and lit the lamp. The oily light cast huge, distorted shadows. He went to the dry sink, pumped some water into the basin, and began to wash the blood from his knuckles. He winced as the water hit the raw skin. Clara stood by the door, shaking, not from cold, from a deep, profound despair that was hollow and absolute. "I will leave," she whispered. Her voice was a dry croak. He didn't turn. He just kept scrubbing his hands. "I will leave in the morning, I promise. I will not be your burden. I am so sorry. Reed, I am so sorry for all of it." He said nothing. The only sound was the splashing of water and the rising whine of the wind. She was at the end. There was no east. There was no west. There was no schoolhouse. There was no money. There was just this room. this man, and the ruin she had brought. A sudden, violent crack of thunder shook the shack. A flash of lightning lit the room, freezing him at the basin. His head bowed, his back a rigid wall of muscle. She thought of the first night, the lightning, her wet dress. She thought of the dream, the terror. She thought of his words. I am not him. This was not the dream. This was not terror. This was the end. And if this was the end, she would not go down as a victim. She would not be the fallen woman Pike named her. She would choose her fall. She moved. He heard the rustle of her dress and he turned, his hands dripping, his eyes wary. Clara, don't! She walked toward him, her eyes locked on his. She was crying, but the tears were silent, hot trails of rage and defeat. They already believe it, she whispered. Pike, Martha, the whole town, they already say I am your whore. She reached the table and stopped, standing just out of his reach. I have no job, I have no money, I have no name left to protect. You fought for me. You bled for me. And I cost you the last dollar I had. Clara, stop it. His voice was a low growl. She reached up, her hands trembling, and undid the top button of her dress. This is the only thing I have left to give, the only coin I have left to pay my way. She undid the second button. You said I was not a burden, but I am a plague. I brought this on you. The rain hammered the roof. Another flash of lightning. It illuminated her, her face wet with tears, her dress open at the throat, revealing the pale skin of her collarbone. Please, she whispered, the word a ragged sob. I cannot be helpless anymore. She took the final step, standing directly in front of him. She put her trembling hand on his chest, on the rough wool of his shirt. She could feel the hammer of his heart beneath her palm. Just do it, Cowboy. Her voice was not the terrified moan of her nightmare. It was a broken, desperate command. Before I change my mind. Reed looked down at her. He saw the tears. He saw the pride. He saw the profound, absolute despair of a woman pushed past her limit. He saw her choice. This was not the dream. This was not weakness. This was a desperate, heartbreaking strength. He covered her hand on his chest with his own. His knuckles were still bleeding. His blood stained her skin. This is not a payment, he said, his voice thick. He raised his other hand and brushed the tears from her cheek with his rough thumb. This is not because of them. This is not because you are a burden. He pulled her to him, his arm locking around her waist, lifting her against his body. He lowered his head, his face inches from hers. If we do this, he growled, his breath hot on her face. It is because of us, only us. He kissed her. It was not the punishing assault of her dream. It was not the chaste warmth of her dead husband. It was a kiss of elemental force. It was desperate. It was hungry. It was a shared, profound agony. It was the taste of rain and blood and salt. She cried out, a small, broken sound, and her arms went around his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair. She kissed him back, with all the rage, all the loneliness, and all the fear she had held inside for a year. He did not stop. This time, he did not stop. He lifted her, her feet leaving the floor, and carried her the 2 steps to the cot. He fell with her, onto the narrow bed, his body covering hers. A solid, living weight. The world vanished. There was no town, no Pike, no Barrow, no past. There was only the storm outside and the storm within. It was a desperate, frantic collision, a shedding of old skins. His hands were in her hair, pulling the pins free. Her hands were at his shirt, tearing at the buttons, needing to feel the skin of the man who had stopped. The man who was now, finally, not stopping. It was not gentle. It was not sweet. It was raw and necessary. And it was the first honest thing that had happened to either of them in years. It was the sound of the thunder, and the rain, and the breaking of 2 solitudes. It was a drowning. It was a rescue. Afterward, the silence that fell was different. The storm still raged outside, but in the small, dark room, There was a profound stillness. They lay tangled on the cot. His weight was heavy on her, but it was not a burden. It was an anchor. She was breathing, her lungs aching. He did not move. He did not roll away. He stayed, his face buried in her hair, his breathing rough and uneven. She waited. She waited for the shame, for the regret, for the cold words. They did not come. After a long time, he shifted. He pulled the thin, rough blanket from the end of the cot and draped it over her bare shoulders. His hand, the scarred one, lingered, his palm warm against her skin. She did not turn to look at him. She could not. The intimacy of what had just happened was too bright, too terrifying to be looked at directly. But she found his hand, her fingers laced through his. He gripped her hand, his fingers tightening, a grip that was not violent, but absolute, a promise of something. They lay in the dark, listening to the rain. There were no words of love. There were no promises of tomorrow. There was only the dark, the storm, and the solid, irrefutable truth of the embrace. The morning after the storm. The world was born into a fragile, brittle silence. The rain had stopped. Clara woke first. She was tangled in the one blanket, on the narrow cot. He was on the floor, on his bedroll, his back to her. She had a fleeting, hazy memory of him holding her, of his hand gripping hers in the dark. But the light of day brought the cold, sharp edges back. She had given herself to this man, and now she was his, in the way of the town, in the way Reverend Pike and Martha Gable had already decided. She rose, pulling the blanket around her shoulders, and moved to the stove. She rekindled the fire, her movements small, quiet. He stirred. He did not get up immediately. He lay still, facing the wall, and she knew he was awake. He was listening to her. The air in the shack was thick, charged with the unspoken. Finally, he rose. He was fully dressed. He had, she realized, put his clothes back on sometime in the dark. After, he did not look at her. He grabbed the bucket. "Need water?" I'll get it." He left. She leaned against the rough planks of the wall, her eyes closed. What had she done? What had they done? When he returned, she had the coffee boiling. She had put on her dress, her armor. He took the tin cup she offered. Their fingers brushed. It was not the accidental, flinching touch of the days before. It was a jolt. Both of them pulled back, their eyes finally meeting. His gray eyes were dark, stormy, and confused. He looked at her, then looked away, at the floor. "Clara," he began, his voice rough. "Please," she whispered. "Do not say anything. Not now. Let us not speak of it." He nodded, a sharp, angry gesture. He was ashamed, or angry, she could not tell. He grabbed his duster and went out to the corral. They lived this way for 2 days. The line had been crossed, and the new territory was a minefield. The silence was no longer about avoidance. It was about fear, fear of what it meant. He was fiercely, terrifyingly protective. He no longer watched her from a distance. He walked her to the edge of town, and he was waiting in the same spot when her day at the schoolhouse ended. Though she had no schoolhouse to go to, he brought her things from the store, a small bag of sugar, a bar of scented soap. He left them on the table without a word. Clara felt like she was living in a fever dream. The town shunned her. Reed guarded her. And in the shack, they orbited each other. 2 planets held in a gravity they could not understand, terrified of the collision. Then, on the 3rd day, the stage from Cheyenne arrived. It was not the usual mud-caked mail coach. This was a private conveyance, clean, black, with polished brass. The horses were matched bays, not the usual string of tired Mustangs. Galloway stopped. Martha Gable came out onto the porch of her store. Reverend Pike, who had been speaking to the sheriff, paused. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a fine black wool suit. His boots were polished, and he stepped gingerly onto the boardwalk. his face a mask of distaste as he avoided the mud. He smelled of the east, of pomade and lavender water. He adjusted his cuffs and looked down the street. Clara had chosen that moment to brave the general store. She needed thread. She was standing on the boardwalk, opposite the hotel, when he saw her. His face, which had been pinched with displeasure, lit up with a sudden radiant smile. It was the smile she remembered, the one he used for the congregation, just before he asked for their donations. Clara. The voice cut through the street noise. It was not loud. It was soft, cultured, and possessive. Clara froze. Every drop of blood left her face. It was a sound she had prayed she would never hear again. She turned, slowly, her body rigid with a cold, absolute terror. "Reverend Barrow," she breathed. "My dear child," he said, stepping into the muddy street, not seeming to care about his boots any longer. He walked toward her, his arms partially open, as if to embrace a lost lamb. "I have found you. Praise God. I have found you." He stopped a few feet from her. His eyes, a pale, watery blue, raked over her. He took in the stained dress, the rough hands, the desolate town, and he smiled. He saw her ruin. "I have been worried to death," he said, his voice carrying, projecting to the small audience of Pike and Gable. "Fleeing into the wilderness, alone, unprotected. It was madness. My dear, I am not your dear," Clara said, her voice shaking, but low and fierce. "Leave me. You have no right. No right." He chuckled, a soft, pastoral sound. "I am your spiritual guardian, Clara. I have a duty to protect you from your impulses, and I am here to take you home." "This is my home." The voice came from behind Clara. "Read." He had come from the stables, silent as a shadow. He was not wearing his duster. He stood in his shirt sleeves, his scarred, bloody knuckles from the fight with Jed still raw. He stood between Clara and the Reverend. Barrow looked at Reed. His smile faltered, replaced by a look of profound disgust. He took in the scars, the rough clothes, the animal presence of the man. "And you are?" Barrow asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "He is," Clara began. "I am the man she lives with," Reed said, his voice flat. "She's not going anywhere. Preacher." Barrow's face darkened. "I see. So, the rumors are true. You have fallen even further than I feared. Clara." He turned his attention back to Reed. "Sir, you are sheltering a woman who is not well. She is unstable. She fled my care in Boston after a difficult episode." "She seems stable enough to me," Reed said. "She just told you to leave. You do not understand. My good man, this woman is my responsibility. In fact, she is a fugitive." Clara's head snapped up. "What?" "That is right, my dear," Barrow said, his voice full of false sympathy. "When you fled, you took things that did not belong to you. A sum of money from the orphanage fund. Desperate, I know, but thievery, nonetheless. I have papers, a warrant. I was willing to overlook it, if you returned. But now, seeing you in this squalor, with this person, you are lying." Clara whispered, the accusation weak, her mind reeling. "Am I?" Barrow smiled. Sheriff Brody." Sheriff Brody, who had been watching the entire exchange, sighed and walked over. "Reverend, welcome to Galloway." "Sheriff, I'm glad you are here. I am Reverend Elijah Barrow from Boston. This woman, Clara Whitmore, is a fugitive from my parish. She stole nearly $300 from my orphanage. I have a warrant for her arrest." He reached into his fine coat and produced a packet of papers. Brody took them, his face grim. "This is a lie," Clara cried, her voice rising. "Reed, he is lying. He is the what?" "Clara," Barrow asked, his voice sharp. Tell them your hysterical stories. Tell them about the man who gave you shelter, food, who offered you his good name, and how you repaid him." Clara's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She saw the faces, Pike nodding, his face a mask of righteous confirmation. Martha Gable, her arms crossed, triumphant. Brody, his face impassive, reading the papers. Reed looked at Clara. He saw the pure, unadulterated terror in her eyes. He saw the trap. "The papers look in order, Reverend," Brody said, his voice weary. "Though I'll need to wire Cheyenne to confirm the warrant." "Of course, Sheriff. In the meantime, I must insist that this woman be taken into custody. She is clearly unsafe, living with this man." "Reed is not—" Clara started. "He's a man of violence, is he not?" Barrow cut in, his voice sharp. "Sheriff, did this man not just assault another townsman, almost to death, in a drunken brawl? Over her?" Brody's face hardened. He looked at Reed. "He's right, Callahan. You're a trouble I don't need." "You are not taking her," Reed said, his voice a low growl. "Reed, don't," Brody warned, his hand dropping to his gun. "This is the law. These are papers. I can't ignore them. And I can't let her stay with you while this gets sorted. It ain't proper, and it ain't safe." Barrow smiled. "She can stay at the hotel. I will procure a room. She will be chaperoned. Until the marshal arrives." The trap was sprung. He would have her. He would get her in a room. And it would be over. "No," Clara said. "No, I will not go with him. I will go to the jail. I will stay in the cell." Brody looked at her, surprised. "Ma'am, you don't want—" "I do. I will not be near him." Barrow's smile faltered. He had not anticipated that. "Fine," Brody said, relieved. "The cell it is. It's clean enough. Reed, you go on home. Let the law handle this." Reed looked at Clara. He saw the desperate plea in her eyes. "Go. Do not fight this. Not here." He turned, his whole body rigid, and walked away. Every step was an agony. He had left her. He had left her to the law, and to the man who was hunting her. The rumors that night were not whispers. They were a firestorm. Reverend Barrow held court in the hotel lobby, speaking to Pike and any of the townsfolk who would listen. He was tragic, his voice heavy with sorrow. "I tried so hard to save her. A young widow, grieving, so susceptible to sin. I took her into the orphanage to help with the children, and she fell. I found her with a man, a stable hand. When I confronted her, she fled. And she took the children's milk money, $300. A harlot," Pike breathed, his eyes gleaming. "And a thief, preying on orphans. She is at home here, then." Martha Gable added, "With Reed Callahan. He's branded, for thievery. They are a matched pair." The town, which had been hostile, now became a righteous mob. They had a focus for their misery, for their hard, failed lives. Clara, the Eastern whore, the orphan robber. Reed heard it all. He sat in his dark shack, the lamp unlit, cleaning his rifle. He heard the raised voices from the saloon. He heard a group of drunk cowboys ride past, shouting her name, shouting obscene suggestions. He heard a rock hit the side of his shack, then another. "Callahan's whore!" He stood, the rifle in his hand. He was ready to kill. Then Sheriff Brody's voice cut through the night. "Break it up! Get on home, all of you! She's in my jail! She ain't his problem tonight! Get!" Reed stood in the dark, his hands shaking with a rage so profound it made him sick. He was not angry at the drunks. He was angry at the papers, at the law, at the trap he could not see, but which was closing around them both. Clara spent the night on a narrow cot in a cold, stone cell. It was cleaner than the shack. It was also colder, but she was safe from Barrow. She did not sleep. She replayed the scene, the warrant, the lie. $300. It was a fortune. It was an amount so large, so specific, that it had to be real. He had planned this. He had forged this. He had come for her. She knew what he wanted. It was not marriage. It was submission. He wanted to break her, to prove that she could not survive without him. He wanted to take her back to Boston, not as a wife, but as his ward, his personal property. locked away in the orphanage where she could never speak of what she had seen. She would rather die. In the morning, Sheriff Brody brought her a tin cup of chicory and a stale biscuit. "Mornin', ma'am. Heard they raised a fuss last night. Sorry for that." "It is all right. Sheriff, I wired Cheyenne. They're checking the wire from Boston. We should hear back. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day. And until then, I stay here. It's the safest place. That Reverend, he's a piece of work. He's already offered to pay for your release into his custody. Do not let him, Sheriff, please." "I won't. I don't like him. But, Mrs. Whitmore, Clara, I have to warn you, if that warrant is real, if Boston confirms it, I have to hand you over. It's the law." "I understand." Reed came just after. Brody led him into the small office, but not into the cell. They spoke through the bars. He looked terrible. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face dark with stubble and fury. "He's lying," Clara whispered immediately. "Reed, he's a monster. I found out. Back east. The orphanage, the girls. He was hurting them. The older ones. When I confronted him, he tried to have me declared insane. That is why I ran. That is the scandal." Reed's hands gripped the bars. The world went red. It was not just a spurned proposal. It was this. "The money," Reed growled. "Did you take it?" "No, never. It is a lie. He forged it to get me back." "I know." Reed's voice was low. "I believe you. Reed, he is not just after me. Brody told me about last night. The rocks. He is threatening you. He told Brody. He told him he will have you charged for harboring a fugitive." Reed finished. His voice was flat. "I know. Brody told me this morning. He said if the warrant is confirmed, and I interfered, he'd have me in the cell next to you." Clara's hand went to her mouth. "Oh, God, Reed. This is my fault. All of it. I have to go." "Go where? You're in a cell. When they let me out, I will go with him. Barrow, I will go back east. It is the only way. He will drop the charges against you. He will leave you alone. If I go." Reed slammed his fist against the bars. The sound was a flat, metallic crack. "You will not. You are not going anywhere with him. Do you hear me? Clara, I will burn this town to the ground first. You cannot fight him. Reed, he has the law. He has papers. All you have is a gun. You will be killed or jailed. For me, I am not worth that. Let me be the judge of that," he said, his voice fierce. "You sit tight. You stay safe. I am gonna think." He left. He walked not to the shack, but out onto the prairie. He walked for hours. He was a simple man. He solved problems with his hands, or his horse, or his gun. But this was a problem of paper, a problem of words. He could not punch a warrant. He could not shoot a lie. He thought of her, in the cell, willing to go back to the monster to save him. Him, the scarred, broken man the town despised. He thought of her words. "I am a burden." He came back to the shack as the sun was setting. He was a man with a plan. It was a desperate, terrible plan. It was the only plan he had. He waited. That night, the wire came back from Cheyenne. Brody came to her cell, his face grim. "Ma'am, it's not good. The warrant, it's confirmed. Out of Boston. $300, signed by a circuit judge. They are sending a Marshal. He'll be here in maybe 3 days to transport you." Clara sank onto the cot. It was done. The lie had won. "Reverend Barrow," Brody continued, his voice full of distaste, "has offered to escort you himself. He says he will take you to Cheyenne, to meet the marshal, to save the territory, the trouble. He has paid your bond." "What? No, you cannot." "Ma'am, he paid 10 minutes ago. He's waiting outside. He has the papers for your release, into his custody. Clara backed against the stone wall.
"No, Sheriff, please, I will not go."
"You have to. He's your legal guardian. Till the marshal gets here. He's got the paper. I'm sorry." Brody unlocked the cell. Barrow was standing in the doorway, his face calm, beatific, victorious. "Clara, my dear, it is all settled. We will go to the hotel. You will have a hot meal. We will leave for Cheyenne in the morning."
"I will not,"
she whispered. "You will." He stepped into the cell. He grabbed her arm. His grip was like iron. "Sheriff, thank you for your service." He began to pull her.
"No!"
Clara screamed. She tried to pull away, but he was stronger than he looked. "Stop this nonsense, Clara," he hissed, his face close to hers, the pious mask gone. "You will do as I say. Let her go." Reed's voice. He was standing in the doorway of the jailhouse. He was not holding a rifle. He was holding a piece of paper. "Callahan," Brody said, sighing. "Get out. This is law. This is done." "No, it ain't," Reed said. He walked forward, into the light. "Sheriff, you're a man of the law, right? You respect the paper." "I do." "Well, I got a piece of paper, too, a new one." He stepped past Barrow, ignoring him, and handed the paper to Brody. Brody read it. His eyes went wide. He read it again. He looked up at Reed, his mouth open. "Reed, when did you, "This afternoon, Justice Harris, at the land office." "What is this?" Barrow demanded, his hand still tight on Clara's arm. "More of your backwoods thuggery?" "No, preacher," Reed said. His voice was calm. "It's law. Sheriff, read it." Brody cleared his throat. He looked at Barrow. "Reverend, it seems Mrs. Whitmore's legal status has changed. As of 3 o'clock this afternoon, this is a marriage certificate." Clara gasped. She looked at Reed, her mind reeling. This is Mrs. Clara Callahan, his wife." Barrow's face went white, then purple. "A trick! A lie! It is a forgery!" "It ain't," Reed said. "It's signed by Harris. It's legal. She's my wife." "It means nothing," Barrow shouted. "She is a fugitive. I will still—" "It means everything," Reed said, his voice hard as stone. "Sheriff, tell him the law. The law in this territory. Can a man be forced to testify against his wife?" Brody was starting to smile. "No, Reed, he cannot."
"And can a wife's property, her money, be seized for her husband's debts?"
"No. And can a wife's debts be taken from her husband's property?" "No, not without his consent." "And," Reed said, taking a step toward Barrow, "can a man, any man, lay claim to another man's wife? Can he transport her? Can he bond her out? Can he even speak to her? Without her husband's permission?" Brody's smile was wide now. "No, Reverend, he cannot. She is his wife. Her bond is void. Your custody is over. You have no claim on her at all." Barrow looked from Reed to Clara, to the paper. He was trapped, beaten, by a piece of paper. You trollop!" he hissed at Clara. "You would marry this to escape justice? You are truly damned." Reed hit him. It was not the brutal assault from the saloon. It was one single, calculating punch. It landed square on Barrow's jaw with a sickening crack. The Reverend crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Brody didn't even flinch. He looked down at the preacher. He fell," Brody said to the ceiling. "Tripped coming out of the cell." He looked at Reed. "Get your wife out of my jail. Callahan, and congratulations. I think." Reed stepped into the cell. Clara was staring at him, her eyes wide, her hand at her mouth. You married me?" she whispered. "While I was in here, without—" "It was just paper, Clara, like you said, to protect you." He held out his hand. "Let's go home." She took his hand. He pulled her out of the cell, past the groaning form of Reverend Barrow, and into the cold, clear night. They did not speak on the walk back. Her hand was in his, The entire town was dark, silent. They reached the shack. He pushed the door open, lit the lamp. It was all the same. The cot, the stove, the chair. But everything was different. She was his wife. She turned to him, her heart a wild, frantic bird in her chest. "Read that paper. I do not—" "It was the only way," he said, his back to her. As he added wood to the stove, "It was the only way to beat his paper, so I got my own. But to be married, tied to me, you are trapped." He turned, his face harsh in the lamplight. "I was trapped before. Clara, we both were. Now, maybe we're less trapped." He looked at her, at the fear and confusion in her eyes. "You tried to run last night, to save me. You were gonna walk away, into the dark." He took a step toward her. "I told you. You were denying the good part of me. You think I'd let you? You think, after all this—" "I'd just let you go? Let him take you?" He shook his head. This is just paper." She remembered their bargain, the one she had made, in her fear. "Read," she said, her voice shaking. When I said I would agree. I said no promises, no words about love. This is for protection." She was terrified. She had crossed the line. She had given him her body. But her heart, that was the last defense. He looked at her, and she saw a flicker of profound pain in his gray eyes. He had married her, and she was pushing him away. He nodded, slowly. "All right, Clara." His voice was heavy. "A bargain, protection, no promises." He turned away from her. He unhooked his duster. He looked at the narrow cot. Then he looked at his bedroll on the floor. He was her husband. He picked up the bedroll. He spread it out by the stove, in its usual place. Clara watched him, her heart breaking. "Read. It's our wedding night, Mrs. Callahan," he said, his voice cold, devoid of all emotion. "And we have a bargain." He pulled off his boots and lay down on the floor, his back to her. She stood in the middle of the room, frozen. She was his wife. She was safe from Barrow. She was safe from the law, and she had never been more alone. She climbed onto the cot, her hands trembling. The shack was cold. The silence was vast. Empty. It was the start of their marriage. It was the start of the truth. The cold gray light of dawn found them exactly as the night had left them. Clara on the narrow cot, her body aching, wrapped in the thin blanket. Reed on the floor, his back to her, a rigid line of denial. The marriage was a fortress, and it was a prison. Clara rose first. The silence in the shack was a physical weight. She moved to the stove, her hands trembling as she stoked the embers. She was Mrs. Callahan. The name felt foreign, a costume she was forced to wear. She had been saved from Barrow, only to be bound to a man who now clearly regretted the impulsive, desperate act. He had done it for protection, not for any other reason, and she had reinforced that. No promises. He rose, the sound of his boots on the floorboards making her flinch. He did not say good morning. He did not look at her. He pulled on his duster, his movement stiff. "I'll check the horses," he said. "Read," she began, her voice small. He paused at the door, his hand on the latch, but he did not turn. "Thank you," she whispered. For what you did at the jail. You saved me." "It was just paper," he said, his voice flat. He stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Clara sank onto the single chair. She was safe, but she was trapped. Barrow was still in town. She could feel his presence, a cancer in the Galloway air. He would not leave. He had been beaten, publicly, by a man he considered a savage. His pride would demand retribution. She did not know how right she was. The sound of horses came an hour later. Not one horse, several. Reed was in the corral, checking a loose shoe on his mare. He looked up, his hand dropping to the colt at his hip. 3 men were riding up the muddy street. One was Sheriff Brody. The third man, Clara did not recognize. He was tall, thin, and wore a clean duster and a flat-brimmed hat. He sat his horse with an easy, professional authority, and leading them, his face a swollen, purple mask of fury, was Reverend Barrow. "Callahan!" Brody shouted, his voice unhappy. "We're here on official business." Clara ran to the door of the shack, her heart seizing. "What business? Sheriff?" Reed asked, his voice low, his hand still resting on his gun. The new man spoke. His voice was cold, clipped, and held no emotion. "Are you Reed Callahan? And is there a woman here by the name of Clara Callahan, formerly Clara Whitmore?" "I am," Reed said. "And she is?" "My name is Marshall Kent. United States Marshal's Office, out of Cheyenne. I'm here in response to a warrant from Boston for the arrest of one Clara Whitmore for the theft of $300. Clara stepped out onto the porch, her blood turning to ice. "But the marriage, Sheriff Brody—" "I'm sorry, ma'am," Brody said, his face full of pity. I was wrong. The marriage, it stops a man from testifying, and it protects your property, but it don't stop a federal warrant. The crime was in Boston. You're still wanted for it." Barrow smiled, a terrible, split-lipped grimace. "The law is the law. Mrs. Callahan, you can't hide from God's justice by wrapping yourself in a sinner's name." This warrant," Marshal Kent said, ignoring Barrow, "was confirmed by telegraph from the governor of Massachusetts. It is legal, it is binding, and I am here to execute it. Mrs. Callahan, you are under arrest." "You're not taking her," Reed said. He did not shout. He simply stated it. He took a step away from his horse, his body now clear, a perfect target. Marshal Kent sighed. He unfastened the leather loop on his own holster. "Mr. Callahan, I have no quarrel with you, but you are now interfering with a federal officer. If you draw that weapon, I will shoot you. If you live, I will arrest you. You will be sent to Yuma prison for 10 years. You'll be no good to your wife then. Am I clear?" Reed's face was a mask of pure, helpless rage. He was trapped. By paper. By law. He could not fight this. "Reed," Clara said, her voice shaking. "No, don't." She walked down from the porch, past him, her head high. She stood in front of the marshal. "I will go. There is no need for more violence. I will go." Kent nodded, his eyes showing a flicker of respect. "I appreciate that, ma'am. She is to be remanded into my custody," Barrow said, stepping forward. "As her spiritual guardian, I will—" "You will be silent, Reverend," Kent snapped, his cold eyes silencing Barrow instantly. "You are a civilian and a material witness. You are not an officer of the law. The prisoner stays in my custody. She will be held in the town jail until I have arranged transport, which will be, God willing, on the morning stage, day after tomorrow. Sheriff, take her." "No," Reed snarled, taking a step. "Reed!" Clara's voice was a command. "It is all right. It is the law. Do not make this worse." He stopped, frozen, as Sheriff Brody gently took Clara's arm. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll get my things," she whispered. "You won't need 'em for the jail." "Clara," Brody said. "Reed, go home. Cool off. Do not, I am begging you, do not come into town." Reed watched, his body shaking, as they led her away. His wife. They led her through the mud, past the triumphant, hateful eyes of the preacher, and back to the jail. He tore the stable apart. He threw the anvil. He shattered a feed bucket against the wall. His rage was so profound, so absolute, he could not breathe. He had failed. His paper had failed. His strength had failed. He sank onto a hay bale, his head in his hands. The world reduced to a single, burning point of failure. He stayed there for "I heard," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "Before I passed out. Hour, then 2. He thought he was a man of action, trapped in a world of words. The warrant was the problem. The lie. He could not fight the warrant, but he could fight the lie. Clara had told him. He was hurting them. The girls. He had to prove it. He went back into the shack. He grabbed his saddlebags. He took a box of cartridges. He took the last of the salt pork and a handful of biscuits. He went to the jail. Brody was at his desk. Clara was in the cell, standing, gripping the bars. "I need to speak to my wife," Reed said. Brody nodded, his face grim, and walked outside, giving them privacy. "Reed, what are you—" "I'm fixing this," he said, his voice low and fast. "Your paper, his paper, it's all just words. I need facts. I need proof." "Proof? Reed, the proof is in Boston. It is 1,000 miles away. You said there was a girl, the one he hurt, the one he sent away." "Mary," Clara whispered, her face pale. "Mary Alcott, but he said he sent her to an asylum. He had her declared insane, just like he tried with me." "He lied," Reed said. "A man like that, he don't want to risk an asylum." She could still talk. He'd send her somewhere else. Did she have family? Anywhere? Clara thought, her mind racing. Yes, she had an aunt in Cheyenne. She mentioned her. She said she was saving money to go to her aunt in Cheyenne. That's where he said the warrant was confirmed. He's been in contact with them. Cheyenne, 60, maybe 70 miles. A hard day's ride, but it was possible. What is her name, the aunt? I do not know. Alcott, the same as Mary. I think she was a seamstress on the east side. It was almost nothing. A needle in a haystack, but it was something. Reed, what are you going to do? I'm going to Cheyenne. He looked at her, his gray eyes burning with a desperate, cold fire. The marshal leaves the day after tomorrow. That gives me maybe 36 hours to get there, find her, and get back. Reed, no, it is too dangerous. Barrow, he will know. He will try to stop you. Let him. He reached through the bars, his hand covering hers. His hand was rough, calloused. You sit tight, he said. You're Mrs. Callahan, you're my wife. I'm coming back for you. He turned and was gone before she could say another word. Reed rode like a man possessed. He did not take the main road. He knew Barrow would have watchers. He cut east, into the low, broken hills, a longer, harder route, but one that was less traveled. His mare was strong, and she ate the miles. He was right. Barrow had not been idle. The preacher had seen the look in Reed's eyes. He knew Callahan would not let this rest. He had 2 men, hired hands from the saloon, men he had paid well. He will go to Cheyenne, Barrow had told them, his voice a low hiss. The telegraph line. He thinks he can fight me. He is an animal. He only understands force. I do not want him killed. Not yet. I want him stopped. I want him broken. I want him to fail. Stop him. Break his horse. Break him. Make sure he does not return. They found his trail 4 hours out of Galloway. They were good trackers. The ambush was set in a narrow wash, 20 miles south of the Cheyenne line. The walls were steep, the ground sandy. A perfect trap. Reed rode into it just as the sun was dipping low. He was tired, his body aching. His mind focused only on the seamstress in Cheyenne. The first shot was a warning. It kicked up sand in front of his horse. The mare screamed and reared. That's far enough! Callahan! A voice echoed from the rocks above. A second shot. Not at him, at the horse. It hit the mare in the chest. She crumpled. A terrible, high-pitched scream, throwing Reed clear. He hit the ground hard, rolling, his rifle, which had been in his scabbard, flying free. 2 men stepped out from the rocks. The boss said to stop you. One of them said, grinning. Looks like you're stopped. Your horse is dead. Reed got to his feet. He was a dozen yards from his rifle. His pistol was still at his hip. Who's the boss? Reed asked, his voice low, his body tense. A fella with a lot of money. The second man said, and a powerful hate for you. Now, we can do this easy, or we can do this hard." Reed didn't answer. He dove, not for the rifle, for the gun at his hip. He drew and fired from the ground. The first man, the one who had grinned, was too slow. Reed's bullet took him in the gut. He folded, his own shot going wild. The second man fired. The shot was fast. It tore through Reed's side, a hot, searing poker that spun him around and dropped him to his knees. He fired again, from his knees, a desperate shot. The bullet hit the second man in the shoulder, knocking him back. The man screamed, dropped his rifle, and scrambled for cover. Reed tried to stand. The pain in his side was a universe. He was bleeding, badly. He could feel the hot, wet rush of it. The second man was gone, scrambling away on his horse. A coward. Reed was alone, in a dry wash. His horse was dead. He was dying. He looked down. The wound was low, on his left side. It was dark, pumping blood. "Clara," he breathed. He would not die here. He tore off his shirt. He ripped a long strip from it and, grunting in agony, packed it against the wound. He cinched his belt over it, tight, until he almost blacked out from the pain. He stood. The world spun. He salvaged what he could, his rifle, his saddlebags, the water canteen, and he began to walk. It was 10 miles to the next relay station. 10 miles, in the dark, bleeding. He walked. He counted his steps. He said her name. Every time he fell, he got up. He thought of her in that cell. He thought of Barrow's smiling face. He reached the station just before dawn. He looked like a dead man. He gave the stable hand a $20 gold piece, his last one. "A horse, your best, and a bottle of whiskey." He rode. He rode the last 30 miles to Cheyenne, the whiskey keeping the pain at bay, the world a red, blurry haze. He found the seamstress's shop. It was closed. He hammered on the door until a frightened-looking woman opened it. "Mary Alcott's aunt," he gasped, leaning on the doorframe, his rifle in his hand. Who are you?" "A friend. I need the letter, the one Mary wrote, about the preacher." The woman's face went white. I don't know. Barrow. He has her. The woman who saved Mary. Her name is Clara. He has her in jail. He's taken her back. Please, I need the proof." The woman saw the blood soaking his duster. She saw the desperation in his eyes. She ran back inside and returned with a small, folded packet of letters. She wrote this before he sent her away. She told me to keep it, in case he ever... Oh, God, is Mary... "She's alive," Reed lied. "But I need this, to save Clara." He took the letters. He didn't have time to read. He tipped his hat and stumbled back to his horse. The ride back was a fever dream. He had to make it. The marshal was leaving in the morning. He rode, his body on fire, the wound a gaping, agonizing hole. He fell from the horse twice. Both times, he pulled himself back up. He arrived in Galloway just as the sun was rising. He was no longer riding. He was slumped over the horse's neck, barely conscious. The horse, sensing home, had walked the last mile. He'd made it. In Galloway, the town was gathering. Barrow, in an act of supreme, arrogant victory, had demanded a small service at the chapel. He wanted to pray for the soul of the woman he had brought to justice. Reverend Pike, his face gleaming with pious fervor, had agreed. The entire town was there. Martha Gable, the men from the saloon, the mothers who had pulled their children from Clara's class. Clara was there, standing between Sheriff Brody and Marshal Kent. Her hands were cuffed. She was pale, her eyes empty. She had given up. Reed was not coming. Reverend Barrow stood at the pulpit. He was in his element. "We gather today," he began, his voice smooth and rich, "to witness the sad, inexorable hand of justice. We see before us a woman lost to sin, a thief, a liar, The chapel doors banged open. Everyone turned. Reed Callahan stood in the doorway. He was not a man. He was an apparition. He was caked in mud and blood. From his head to his boots, his duster was gone. His shirt was a single, massive red stain. He was holding his rifle like a crutch. He took one step into the chapel, and then another. "Clara!" he breathed. "Read!" she screamed, lunging forward. But the marshal held her fast. You're talking about sin! Preacher!" Reed gasped, stumbling toward the pulpit. Barrow's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He had been told Callahan was dead. "This," Reed said, his voice a wet rattle. "This is your sin." He reached the front. He looked at Marshal Kent. He pulled the blood-stained packet of letters from his pocket and threw them at the marshal's feet. From a girl named Mary Alcott. Read it. Read it. Aloud." Marshal Kent looked at the bloody letters. He looked at Reed, swaying on his feet. He looked at Barrow, whose face had gone a sickly, greenish white. Kent picked up the letters. He opened the first one. "My dearest aunt." He began to read, his voice clear and cold. "I am in terror. The Reverend, he is not a man of God. He comes to my room. He locks the door." The chapel was dead silent. Kent's voice was the only sound. He read of the abuse. He read of the threats. He read of the other girls. It was a clear, horrifying, and detailed confession. When he finished, he folded the letter. He looked at Barrow. Barrow did not run. He was a cornered rat. His life was over. The warrant, the theft, it was all gone. He screamed. A high, thin, animal sound. You whore!" He was not looking at Reed. He was looking at Clara. She was the one, the source of it all. He had a small derringer, a pistol hidden in his sleeve. He pulled it, his hand shaking, and leveled it at her. "Barrow, no!" Brody yelled, going for his gun. But Reed was faster. He had no strength. He had no time. He only had instinct. He threw himself, his entire body, in front of Clara. The shot was small, a sharp crack. It hit Reed square in the chest, just below the collarbone. The force of it, combined with his weakness, was absolute. He crumpled, a dead weight, into Clara's arms, knocking her back against the pew. The chapel exploded. Marshal Kent and Sheriff Brody were on Barrow, slamming him to the floor, tearing the gun from his hand. "Elijah Barrow, you are under arrest for attempted murder." The townspeople were frozen. They had seen it. They had seen the letters. They had seen the scarred, branded cowboy, the man they called a sinner, bleed out, walk through death, and then take a bullet for his wife. Martha Gable was weeping. Pike was backing away, his face pale, crossing himself. But Clara saw none of it. She was on the floor, cradling Reed. "No, no, no, Reed!" He was so pale. The blood. There was so much blood. From his side, from his chest. "Reed, open your eyes, please!" She ripped at her own dress, pressing the fabric against the new wound. "Someone, help him! Get the doctor!" He was unconscious. His breathing was a shallow, terrible rasp. They carried him back to the shack. The doctor came, a weary man who had seen too much. "The side wound, it is deep. I have cleaned it, but the blood he has lost, and this new one," he shook his head. "He is strong, an animal, but Mrs. Callahan, I do not know. Pray, that is all you can do." The town was silent. The marshal had Barrow in the cell. The warrant for Clara was, as he put it, lost in the fire of a much larger crime. She was alone with him. She sat by the cot, in the one small chair. She had washed him. She had cut away the bloody shirt. She saw the map of his life, the scar on his face, the brand on his hand, the old wounds on his back, and the new, terrible, weeping holes that she had brought him. He was still, so still. She held his hand, the scarred, branded hand. She held it to her cheek. "Reed," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You cannot leave me. Do you hear me? You cannot. You stubborn, brave, magnificent fool. You married me. You bled for high-strung. You died for me. You cannot leave me. Not now. The night passed. He was hot, the fever taking him. She bathed his face. She forced water between his lips. She did not sleep. I am so sorry, she wept, her tears falling onto his hand. I told you, no promises. I was so scared. I was a fool. You are my life. You are the only true thing, the only good thing that has ever happened to me. She leaned down, her hair falling around his face. She kissed his scarred cheek. She kissed the brand on his hand. She kissed the bandage on his chest. I love you, she whispered. The words were torn from the deepest part of her. I love you, Reed Callahan. I love you. Please, please, God, do not take him from me. I love you. She collapsed, her head on his chest, her sobs the only sound in the small, dark room. Near dawn, the fever broke. His breathing, which had been a rasp, evened out. Clara had fallen asleep in the chair, her hand still clutching his. She woke to a pressure, a faint squeezing of her fingers. She gasped, her head snapping up. He was looking at her. His eyes, his gray, stormy eyes, were open. They were clear. Reed? She breathed, her heart stopping. Oh, God, Reed, you are here. He looked at her for a long time. His lips were cracked. He tried to speak, his voice a dry, faint rasp. She leaned in, putting her ear close to his mouth. I heard, he whispered. She pulled back, confused. You heard what? Before, he whispered, a faint, pained smile touching the corner of his mouth. In the chapel, I heard before I passed out. He closed his eyes, not in death, but in a deep, healing sleep. Clara's tears came again, but this time, they were not of fear or grief. She held his hand, his strong, scarred, living hand, and for the first time in her entire life, she was home. A month is a long time. It is long enough for the prairie to change its skin, for the memory of a hard winter to be burned away by a relentless sun. It is long enough for the mud of Galloway to turn to powder, and for a man, shot twice, to decide whether he will live or die. Reed Callahan decided to live. His recovery was a slow, agonizing crawl back to the light. The first week, he was lost in a fevered, bloodless haze. Clara never left the chair by the cot. She was no longer a schoolteacher, or a refugee, or a prisoner. She was a nurse. She was a wife. She bathed him. She cleaned the seeping wound in his side, the raw, stitched-over hole in his chest. She forced broth between his cracked lips. She held his hand, the scarred, branded hand. When the tremors took him, she spoke to him, low and constant, her voice a lifeline in his darkness. She did not cry. She had no tears left. She was a fierce, exhausted, and stubborn anchor. The town, shamed and silent, left them alone. But gifts appeared. A jar of preserves on the porch, a side of bacon left hanging from the doorknob, a stack of clean linens left by Martha Gable, who did not knock, but who lingered for a moment, her face a mask of complex regret, before walking away. Reverend Pike was gone. He had vanished 2 days after Marshal Kent had taken Barrow, leaving the chapel locked and the bell silent. Galloway had seen the truth. They had seen a man, whom they had dismissed as a scarred, violent outcast, ride into death itself to save his wife. They had seen him walk into a chapel, bleeding from a mortal wound, to present the truth, and they had seen him take a bullet for her. There was no more judgment. There was only a quiet, humbled awe. On the 8th day, Reed's fever broke. He woke, and his eyes were clear. He was weak, his body a hollowed-out ruin. But he was him. The cot was too narrow for her to care for him. You must move, she had whispered, her voice raw. Where? He had rasped. To the bed. The cot. It is breaking. It was a lie. He nodded. He was too weak to argue. He had wrapped his arm around her neck. his breath catching in pain, and she had taken his weight. She was stronger than she looked. She had half dragged, half carried him from his bedroll on the floor, which he had insisted on, to the narrow cot, and now they reversed it. He slept. He slept for a whole day. When he woke, she was there.
"You said, 'I love you,'"
he whispered. His voice was a dry leaf. Clara, who had been wringing out a cloth, froze. You were dreaming." "No," he said, his eyes holding hers. "You said it in the chapel. I heard you by the cot. When I was in the dark." She could not speak. The shame of her no promises bargain, of her fear, rose up, choking her. He saw the look on her face. It's all right, Clara." He breathed, the effort costing him. "You were scared. You had a right to be. You had a bargain, protection." He had given her an escape. He was telling her that her words, spoken in love and desperation over his sickbed, did not bind her, and she, in that moment, loved him so fiercely it was a physical pain. "Rest, read," she whispered, laying the cool cloth on his forehead. "Just rest." The silence in the shack changed. It was no longer the silence of tension, or fear, or unspoken bargains. It was the silence of healing. As his strength returned, the shack, which had been a prison, then a sanctuary, became simply too small. This wall," he said one afternoon. A month after the shooting, he was sitting in the chair, his side heavily bandaged, but he was dressed. "It's rotted through." "It is," she agreed, washing their 2 plates. "The roof. It's going to leak, come the next storm." "I know." He looked at her. I have a little money saved. From the last cattle drive. Enough for lumber. From Cheyenne." "What are you saying? Read?" "I am saying this shack is not fit for a woman. For my wife. We should build." And so they began. He was not strong enough to lift, but he was strong enough to sit on the porch and direct. He taught her. He, the man of so few words, found a new voice. He taught her how to measure, how to saw a clean line. "No, brace it against your knee. Let the saw do the work. Don't force it." She learned. Her soft, Eastern hands, already raw from lye soap and water buckets, grew calloused. She hauled the new lumber from the wagon he had hired. They did not tear the old shack down. It was their foundation. It was the heart of the house. They built around it. Reed, as his strength returned, worked alongside her. They added a new room, a real room, with 2 windows and a floor that did not sag. They built a new hearth, with good stone, not the crumbling mud she had patched. Their hands would meet, passing a tool or steadying a board. The touch was no longer a jolt. It was a simple, solid connection. They were a partnership. One afternoon, as Reed was showing her how to set a roof shingle, he paused. His hand was on hers, guiding the hammer. You never told me," he said, his voice quiet. "Why you stayed, after I kissed you, that night, the dream." Clara stopped hammering. She looked at their hands, his scarred, brown hand covering her smaller, work-stained one. "You stopped," she said, her voice soft. Barrow, he never would have stopped. You yelled at me. You were angry at yourself, not at me. You were angry because you were not him. I think that was the first time I knew I was safe with you." He did not speak for a long time. He just held her hand on the hammer. Then he squeezed it. "We're burnin' daylight, Mrs. Callahan." Life settled into a new rhythm, the rhythm of building. The town, seeing the new lumber, seeing them work, side by side, understood. The healing was not just for Reed. It was for Galloway. The children were the first to bridge the gap. Eli, the small boy with the apple, appeared one afternoon. He was just standing at the edge of the corral, watching Reed work with a young Mustang. Clara saw him. She dried her hands on her apron and walked out. "Hello, Eli." "Ma'am," he whispered. his eyes on the ground. My ma, she sent this. He held out a small basket of eggs.
She says she's sorry for yellin'.
Clara's throat tightened. She knelt. Thank you, Eli. And you tell your mother there is nothing to forgive. He looked up. Is it true, what they said? That the preacher was a monster? Yes, Eli, he was. And Mr. Callahan, he's a hero, like in the stories? Clara looked over at her husband. He was in the center of the corral, his shirt soaked with sweat, his body still thin, moving in a slow, patient dance with the wild horse. He was scarred, and he was beautiful. Yes, Eli, she said. He is. Eli came back the next day, with 2 other children. Within a week, Clara was a teacher again. She held class on their new porch. She had 6 students. Their payment was eggs, milk, a sack of flour. She taught them reading and sums, and about the brave, foolish Icarus. Reed would sit at the far end of the porch, mending a bridle, listening to her voice, the educated, clear voice that had once terrified him. The house grew. Their lives grew. Reed worked, taming the wild mustangs that roamed the high prairie. He had a gift. He was not a bronco buster, a man of violence. He was a whisperer, a man of patience. He was breaking the wildness, not with force, but with understanding. He was, Clara knew, taming himself. He was a husband. He would rise in the dark, and she would feel him kiss her hair, a light, almost accidental touch. He would bring her coffee in the bed they now shared, a real bed, which he had built with his own hands. They lived as husband and wife, but the words were still locked away. He knew she loved him. He had heard her, and she knew he loved her. She saw it in the way he watched her, in the way he built her a home, in the way he had, without hesitation, stepped in front of a bullet. But the ghost of her bargain, the no promises she had demanded in her fear, still stood between them. He had agreed to it, and Reed Callahan was a man who kept his bargains. It was up to her to break this one. She waited. Each night, she would light the lamp, just as she had when she was just a guest. She would set it in the new window, the one that faced the prairie, and she would wait for him. He would ride in, a dark shape against the vast, dying light, and her heart would settle. She kept the old dress, the stained, wool dress from the first night. She kept it in a small chest he had built for her. It was a reminder, a talisman, of the night she had been ruined, and the night she had been saved. The seasons turned, the green of summer deepened, then faded to the gold of fall. The nights grew cold, and then, one night, the sky turned that familiar, bruised purple. The wind rose, not a breeze, but a high, keening wail. It smelled of ice and distance. A storm was coming. Reed was out, securing the new weaned colts, his voice a low, calm rumble cutting through the wind. Clara was inside, setting bread to rise by the new hearth. The first drops of rain hit the window. Not gentle, hard, like thrown gravel. She stopped, her hands covered in flour. She listened. It was the same sound, the sound of the wind, the rattle of the rain, the sound of her first night. She looked at the chest. He was her husband. She loved him. He loved her. But the circle was not closed. The bargain was not broken. She made a choice. She washed the dough from her hands. She went to the chest and opened it. She took out the old wool dress. It still smelled faintly of mud and wood smoke. She took off her clean calico apron, her simple house dress. She unpinned her hair, letting it fall, thick and auburn, down her back. She pulled the old, rough dress over her head. It was the dress of Clara Whitmore, the refugee. The door opened. Reed stood there, his duster soaked, his hair plastered to his face. "Clara, the wind! It's taken the porch. I need—" He stopped. He saw her. He saw the dress. He saw her hair. "Clara," he whispered. What are you doing? Put your clothes on." She did not answer. She walked past him, out of the new, warm room, out of the home they had built. She walked onto the porch, into the heart of the storm. The wind tore at her, pressing the dress against her, just as it had the first night. The rain was icy, stealing her breath. "Clara!" he yelled, his voice full of a sudden, sharp fear. "Come back inside. You'll freeze." She turned to face him, standing in the center of the porch. A crack of thunder exploded overhead, and in the simultaneous, blinding flash of lightning, he saw her. It was the image burned into his mind, the woman in the wet dress, her form outlined, raw and vulnerable. But this time, her face was not filled with terror. Her eyes were not wide with fear. She was looking at him. Her face was calm. Her eyes were full of a deep, profound, and absolute love. She was not the victim. She was not the refugee. She was not the woman from the nightmare. She was his wife, and she was choosing him. She was, in the only way she knew how, erasing the past and offering him a new beginning. Reed understood. He stood in the doorway, the warm light of their home behind him. He looked at her, standing in the cold, dangerous dark. He walked slowly, deliberately, out of the house. He did not grab his duster. He walked into the deluge, his own shirt soaked in seconds. He stood in the mud of the yard, the rain streaming from his hair, looking up at her. She had chosen the storm. He would choose it with her. He walked to the porch, climbed the steps, and stood before her. She was shivering. Her lips blue, but she did not move. She did not break his gaze. He reached out, his hands scarred and calloused, and put them on her shoulders. "This time," he said, his voice low, rough with an emotion so powerful it choked him. "I won't let you change your mind." He kissed her. It was not the desperate, angry kiss of the storm. It was not the hollow, paper kiss of their marriage. It was the first true kiss of their lives. It was rain and cold and a warmth that came from so deep inside. It had nothing to do with the fire. It was his, it was hers. It was, finally, theirs. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his body, sharing his warmth. They stood on the porch, locked in an embrace. As the sky tore itself apart around them, there was no fear. There was no past. There was only the storm, and the two of them, finally, completely, home. Later, the storm passed, as all storms do. It left the air scoured, clean, and cold. They did not go inside. They sat on the new porch, in the chairs they had built, wrapped in a single, heavy blanket. Reed had built a fire in the hearth, and the warm, orange glow spilled out from the open door, a beacon in the night. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the stars appear, one by one, in the wet, black sky. "I heard you," Clara whispered, her head resting on his shoulder. "In the chapel, you said, Clara, I was looking for you," he whispered back, his arm tightening around her. "I love you, Reed Callahan," she said, the words as clear and bright as the new stars. He kissed the top of her head. "I know, and I love you, Clara Callahan." They sat, two scarred, quiet people, on the porch of the old relay station. It was the place where all the pain, and all the fear, and all the loneliness had begun. And it was the place, they both knew, under the vast, forgiving sky, where their love had finally, and forever, become eternal. Thank you so much for listening to our story. It means the world to us. We're curious. Where in the world are you listening from? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to connect. Please consider subscribing to From Wild West. And if you enjoyed the story, share your thoughts with us.